It is my great pleasure to introduce the next panel, which is LA City's planners planning for the autonomous vehicle, hosted today by a very talented radio host who has a show on KCRW, DNA, Frances Anderton.
Thank you so much. Actually, I don't think I need this microphone, so I'll just have it at the ready when it comes to time for questions. There it is. Okay, oh, there we go. Great. Can you all hear me, everybody? Oh, now I need the microphone. It's got a green light.
There it goes.
There we go. Okay, can you all hear me? Oh, okay, well, I'll shout. So as Terry so kindly said, I'm with KCRW. I host a show called DNA. Terry's even been on DNA when the Peterson Museum was just a twinkle in his eye. But anyway, I'm thrilled to be moderating this panel today. When I was called by the organizers about it, and I was told what the topic would be, I was absolutely super excited to do it because just recently I had a conversation with a city official. I won't say which city, but it's a city that is quite well known for its sustainability, its commitment to sustainability. And he said, you know, our dirty little secret is that actually the majority of our revenue comes from the gas-powered, car-based economy, whether it's car dealerships, parking tickets, parking offences, the list goes on and on. The cars provide more of their income even than their sales tax. And he said, we're freaking out. We're freaking out at this potential autonomous car future. On the one hand, we welcome it. And on the other hand, we're really, really very worried about how we're going to finance the city, including financing the infrastructure for the autonomous car future. So that raised all sorts of questions, and I'm so thrilled to be able to have the opportunity to talk about that question and others relating to the integration of the autonomous car into the urban fabric, into municipalities, into bureaucracy, and we're going to talk about that now. I'm so thrilled to be joined by Ashley Hand immediately to my left with CityFi, David DeRosa with AECOM, Michael Lim, a global transportation tech and finance advisor, and Ryan Westrom with Mobility Partnerships. He is the Mobility Partnerships lead, I should say, at Greenfield Labs at Ford. You can read more about them and their glowing bios in your pamphlet. But we're going to kick it right off with Ashley. Any one of you that is in this space will know Ashley Hand. In fact, I'm just going to ask you, could we have a quick show of hands? How many of you are in the industry, as it were, and how many of you are sort of curious observers? Hands up for who's in the industry. Okay, not as many, actually. So more people on the curious side than on the super expert side. That's great, but we'll make sure that some of the terms get explained. So I'm going to throw it to Ashley Hand. She is absolutely a leader in this field and very much focusing on what's termed a human-centered approach to creating the smart city. She does all sorts of advising on these issues, but she sent out a very interesting tweet yesterday getting people interested in this panel for today, and I think she should tell you exactly what the tweet was. It was a provocation, and I want her to explain it.
Thank you, Frances. And I think I threw out the fact that I think that the future, there are autonomous vehicles in it, but that they're shared. And it's not just about autonomous vehicles. And I think we need to really think about how do we create an ecosystem of services that serve all mode choice, but also the needs of our communities as they continue to evolve. You know, we can't think about it purely from the perspective of a technology trying to solve urban issues, but really thinking about how the confluence of many decisions we'll be making in the short term around policy, around urban design, and around process that will fundamentally reshape our cities, with technology and autonomous vehicles being a key part of that The fact is that we just don't have the space to think about the one-for-one replacement of the personally operated vehicle, the single occupancy vehicle. We have to figure out alternative models to move the number of people that we have to move. I mean, last year, the city of LA hit 4 million people, the city alone, never mind the rest of the region, and we just don't have the space to continue to build infrastructure to serve the single occupancy vehicle.
But how much are cities connected on this whole this enterprise of making, because when you say this, LA has 4 million people, it does, but LA County has something like 16 million people, and then we have the exurbs, and it goes on and on. Then we have the 5 counties. So we're really talking millions of people.
Absolutely.
We're not talking just the boundaries of LA, because obviously this is boundaryless.
Yes.
But are the cities boundaryless in terms of how they all approach this future?
There's certainly different stages where cities are starting to consider what the potential impact is, and I think we're seeing that across the country, both at the state level as well as at the municipal level. The city of Los Angeles took a very early stab at it, and with the idea of, if we wait till this technology happens to us, we will end up with some of the problems that we saw when the first round of automobiles hit the streets of our cities. We started to redesign everything to serve the automobile and forgot about the fact that our cities are really about people. And in order for us to have the opportunity and environmental impacts and the positive consequences of density, we need to think differently about what we do in responding to this technology. So we developed a transportation technology strategy. The idea was, how do we get out ahead of this now by defining not just what we want the future to look like, but what are the things we need to do as an organization, as the Los Angeles Department of Transportation, to adapt to a change in the way that we deliver services, the way that we manage infrastructure, and fundamentally, how do we think about things like changing revenue models and things that are going to inevitably impact our workforce and our capacity as a city to deliver services.
But what you say, LA got ahead of this, and it developed it developed what sounded like it did a lot of thinking about it. What is it actually done tangibly and physically that is in place, given that we've already had a change of the law in California where...
Yeah, we're going to have, we're going to see permits pulled for people to test autonomous vehicles without human drivers. I think that's a very exciting thing, and I think the city has been at the table and advocating to have a larger stake in being able to define how and where and what this looks like. So some of the things that we did in the short term with this transportation technology strategy was to look at, okay, well, there's 3 core services of kind of the mobility of the future, right? There's data as a service. In order to have connected and autonomous vehicles where they are able to receive real-time information, communicate with the infrastructure around them, and respond to the environment, we need to think about data as a critical asset. So we need to be able to build up the capacity of the organization to not only collect valuable data, but then share it in a very rapid way. The second idea was mobility as a service, which is not a unique concept to the city of Los Angeles, and in fact, we've kind of stole it from where lots of other cities across the country are looking at this idea that as a user of transportation, my needs are not, I buy a vehicle that seats 5 people for the worst case scenario in my life, but that during my day and my week, I may be able to walk to a business meeting, I may ride a bike to go grab lunch, I may need to carpool with the kids in the evening, and I may want to take a public transit to an evening event. Those things all combined on a single platform where I can streamline payment and access and scheduling to those services is mobility as a service. So this idea that at the touch of a button, I can access what I want. And the third concept was infrastructure as a service, which is this idea that we need to pivot the way we think about infrastructure in the United States. This idea that the public right-of-way is universally available to us at no cost because, well, we pay some magic gas tax and somehow it provides us with our roads and infrastructure, is failing us. As cars get more efficient, those revenues are going down. As we're starting to see people pick up different services, we're going to start to lose this income that we have coming into our coffers. As well, we also have to think about the fact that parking revenue and other things are going away, as your concerned city leader mentioned, and we have to think about alternative delivery models for that. So infrastructure as a service is this idea that we may have to consider a pay-as-you-go model. We may need to think differently about how we access the roads that we use and pay to play in those systems. And now I think there's a lot of opportunity to look at market segmentation, because inevitably right now, particularly in Los Angeles, the people that cannot afford to live close to where they work have to drive the furthest, and we don't want to penalize them unintentionally by having a pay-as-you-go model to our infrastructure. However, in Sweden, they just announced that they have built a highway where not only do they allow for inductive charging, so you can charge your electric vehicle as you're driving along, but they're setting up in a way that you actually can pay for that electricity that you're taking out of the system as you go, which is a remarkable way of thinking about an entire system of services, with infrastructure being at the foundation of it.
Right. So what you're talking about is a completely holistic system. That the very definition of connected, because connected is the key word that comes up over and over again. And I guess the question is that to what extent are municipalities and car companies and tech companies connecting? So I want to throw it to, is that going to be you, Ryan, or you, David, that takes that question? Sort of how do we take it from the philosophical principles to the application?
Sure, happy to take a stab at it, and then David can weigh in after. The connection that is happening now in this industry between OEMs and people who had more traditionally
Did you say OEMs?
Yes, original equipment manufacturers. So
that's like a regular old gas-powered car?
Automakers, if you will.
Right, and those are driven by, I heard this great face this morning, we are carbon-based life forms. OEMs are driven by carbon-based life forms, is that right?
In many cases so far, I think that's fairly accurate, right? I mean, and so internal combustion engine was a huge technology breakthrough and has been around with us for 100 years now. But you have people who are experts in making automobiles coming together with people who have traditionally been in the Sorry. We're trying our best up here. Is that better? There we go. Awesome. So we have people who have traditionally been in that automaking space. And I'm just going to hold it right here. There we go. And then people who've been laying out cities. You have planners, you have transportation engineers, transportation planners. But then you also have technologists now, right? And so you have this kind of trifecta of people who are coming together in one industry and trying to figure out what the future should be. And that has huge ramifications for what the policies should be for cities as they're trying to work with all of these new players. And it of course is, the lunch panel to come up is kind of implying the same sort of question of who's going to be able to provide the answers in this realm. But I think that it's really very heartening for me to see. I'm a person who comes from the transportation background, a transportation engineer and planner, to see people within all of those spaces kind of recognizing the need to really understand the places that they're building in. And I think that that's the key. I mean, Ashley kind of suggested already the notion of, what do we do with the space that all the mobility walks through or drives through or bikes through. And there is certainly some pay-as-you-go depending on what the mobility form is. I mean, that already exists in the form of transit and tolling in certain places. But how we think about that public space, I mean, first of all, think about that as public. It's our public lands, if you will. It's really the greatest resource in terms of public lands that we have in the country. We're all very familiar with the National Park Service and treasure the land that is preserved in our country as part of that. But really the greatest quantity in terms of acreage that we have in our country of public space is our streets and how we think about that space. And they have to serve incredible functions, right? So they have to be the utility corridors, the mobility corridors, and all of these sort of utilitarian functions. But then they also are the space that gives our cities their look and its feel. And so it's really important, I think, for us to kind of remember that we have control of that space and have an opportunity perhaps to change how it looks and it feels with the advent of technology that may use that space slightly differently than it has in the past. And so all these players in that marketplace, the OEMs and the technologists, and then of course the traditional planners and city regulatory bodies are going to have to grapple with what does that mean as technology continues to shift.
Well, Ashley knows that I have a tendency to go to the kind of like the Joe public question, which is, I hear you talking about that, you know, we own the space, we control it, et cetera, except I think many of us feel we don't control the space. We can't get a pothole fixed, we can't get sidewalks fixed, we don't know which department is responsible for a bus bench. There seem to be multiple bureaucracies and departments relating to the streets. In fact, one feels like one doesn't have any control at all. So I guess this future, this autonomous future, seems to be predicated on linkage. And I guess my question is, and maybe this should go to you, David, because you're working on the Olympics, you're working in a very ambitious way on really presenting LA's streets and its public sphere and its infrastructure in its best possible way and its most usable and accessible way come 2028. So you must be thinking about this, and you must be working with these different departments and looking at how this is applied on a very practical way.
Yeah, that's very true. So first, can people hear me? Is the mic working? No. Okay.
I hope our autonomous cars will be able to hear us.
Okay. Let's see if it'll stay right there. So it's a really interesting conversation. I think it's a good point to reiterate that the street is a public good, and we have made choices in how we've decided to use it. And a lot of that, for example, let me back up and couple that with an environment like Los Angeles, this big city, has no more room to expand, similar to points that Ashley made. And so myself as a planner, I look at that and figure out the resources and opportunities that we have now and the challenges that we have now. How are we going to create a better future using these finite resources that in fact we have? And how have we dedicated these rights of way to move people and goods? And so when you think about, so if you think about specifically the Olympics, what's interesting about that scenario is we've got until 2028, which is really not that far away when you start backing out the types of work that we all do. And the Olympics are not centered around building new large pieces of infrastructure in Los Angeles. That was part of the theme, if you will, from the bid, is that we have the sports complex, we have the transportation networks in Los Angeles. So now how are we going to use that to benefit both the attendees for the games and then also the city after the games are over? What it comes down to, a big piece of it, is this mobility as a service, like Ashley mentioned, where you start thinking about more efficiently using the network. How do people behave? What are their current modes of transportation? Why? What is a more efficient mode of transportation? How can we encourage them, nudge people to move to these other modes that will still have reliability, they'll be safe, they'll arrive on time to where they're going, it will be a seamless transaction. So those are the types of thoughts that as a transportation planner and a mobility planner, we're working with agencies, transit agencies, city governments, to start to figure out how we arrive at that future scenario. And it's complex. The system right now, it has been around for a while in its current form. If we think about Los Angeles, perhaps people know that we used to have a more robust streetcar network in the city and the equivalent of light rail. A lot of that came up, so now we have the current roadway network that we have today. And the future is going to be connecting and educating people on the different mode choices that they have. So it's not going to be one silver bullet. It's not going to be just an automated car or an electric scooter or whatever the case may be. It's not one thing that's going to lead to this future where people are moved more efficiently and together. It's going to be a combination of all this. So it's very complex. So that's a quick background on the types of challenges that we think about and pose solutions on today.
Well,
Right.
and I might add, I think one of the things that David mentioned was this idea that there's a whole ecosystem of services, but it's also a whole new litany of providers that didn't exist even just a few years ago. I was in another city when Uber and Lyft showed up, and nobody knew how to regulate them, and nobody knew how to classify them, because they were arguing they were a tech company, and the taxis were arguing they were a transportation company, and they needed to be regulated the same way. So what I think cities are trying to get their heads around right now is not only how do we start to manage an ecosystem of services instead of being we provide this kind of service, we regulate that kind of service, and then everyone else is on a free-for-all, and we provide the infrastructure, is how do we kind of make sure that we're getting the right type of data from each of these services so we can create more informed decisions about where we build, how we build, what we prioritize. Is this a neighborhood that needs better walking infrastructure? Does this neighborhood need better biking infrastructure? Does this neighborhood need to think about better public transit connectivity? Those are questions that we don't have a complete picture of because we have so many silos of all this data because all these operators are now functioning. And I think what we're seeing is that the city is getting much more sophisticated and understanding that the need for that data is going to be instrumental in shaping that future. So things like looking at travel demand ordinances and trying to figure out how we design and develop our buildings in this city has a major impact on our transportation network. So if we can create incentives for people to provide other options than just, I'm gonna make a house for your car in a parking spot, and then I'm gonna make a house for you, and you have to pay for both no matter how you travel. Those things are being looked at in cities across the country as we start to think about what the future of autonomous vehicle is, because maybe you don't need to park your own car anymore. And maybe we don't need to couple the housing costs with the parking costs, and we can make our housing more affordable for people, because now all of a sudden you're not storing your vehicle 95% of the time. You're paying into a service that picks you up when you need to go somewhere. And so I think those are key considerations that the cities are starting to look at, and how do we kind of stitch together that network a little bit more effectively, and a lot of it comes down to the data.
Right, and
May I
getting,
add a
yeah, I was
little
going to
bit
say,
too?
it's
Yeah,
right
so
to you, Michael. This is your topic.
I have very strong feelings about
Yes.
this as well, and I was listening here. But connectivity, I spent the past year and a half working with the city of LA, developing an autonomous vehicle strategy for the city, and also financing, operationalizing, plan for the city. And this notion of connectivity is actually quite critical because, going back to what you said, unless there is this ecosystem where data is being shared, you're not going to be able to optimize the network. You're not going to be able to maximize some of the safety opportunities that we have. But the notion of sharing the data, right? I mean, how do you incentivize? There are silos, not only within the city, but with various different folks that are outside of the city, the various different vendors. I can tell you, my background is in entrepreneurship and finance and such, so I've dealt with the private sector quite a bit. And when I was in the city, I helped curate an ecosystem of partners, including Ford and various others, to engage in these prototyping, iterative exercise as well. But one thing that came up over and over is the notion of IP, right? And trade secrets and so on and so forth. And rightfully so, these private vendors want to retain the secret sauce, or the what makes them tick, what makes them differentiated. So how do you enable collaboration? How do you incentivize collaboration is what I think about quite a bit. So I think about it from two different perspectives. So one is, again, I think many of us articulated here that there are multiple different assets that we have, the amenities that we have within the city, including roadways. We also have other infrastructure. We have curbside and so on and so forth. We have leverage, and especially as we work together as a cohesive region, not just individual cities and competing against each other, we can have significant leverage. And I always talk about how we can be a voting bloc and actually harness the direction of the market. So that's something that I've been pushing for very strongly when it comes to LA. We should not be just out there in the front, but bringing everyone else with us. So there's a stick aspect of it. We control the right of way for some of these infrastructure. There's also the carrot aspect of it, which I think about a lot. City controls, the curbside. We control traffic signals. Is there an opportunity to enable better performance of the vehicle because they're integrated into the infrastructure? Once you start having conversations like that, where there are tangible benefits in terms of customer service, in terms of being able to increase their reputation because they can cut back on, say, the carbon emissions, so on and so forth. It becomes much more attractive. So by participating, you can create a bigger pie, is what you can potentially propose.
But the perfect example that we're all familiar with, and I think it gets right to the heart of this issue, is we all turn on Waze to get off the main street, and Waze sends us down a street to turn left, and there's no traffic lights. And as I understand it, the reason why it does that is because, Waze doesn't share its information with the traffic
Unless
engineers or the
there's a
other way
rule
around.
saying you can't take a
Can
left,
there be-
they'll
Right.
take you.
They'll
Yeah.
take you. So, and as I understand it, it's because of the IP. Is that correct? So could you tell me, is there an answer to that Waze problem? What does one need to do between the city and the tech companies to get people not to go into traffic on a left turn with no traffic light?
Yeah, I mean,
that seems to be like a fundamental cog in the wheel of this whole system.
Yeah, I mean, that's a bit of a complicated situation, admittedly. Again, I think there are the stick side of things, carrot side of things. I mean, we do control the roadways. We have rights, and we control who has access to the roadways and things like that to some degree. So we can use that stick. Also, the carrot side of things. I think Ashley was at the city when the city was discussing sharing of the data and things like that to help optimize the way Waze works. So withholding that data, I guess that's the stick side of things again. But if there are additional opportunities to further increase the performance of Waze, potentially there's an opportunity there. But I would have to dig into that a little bit more.
But it's all these assets that one has to work
and
with.
it's the difference between what Waze's objectives is to save you 2 minutes on every ride that you take, period. So it doesn't matter if there isn't a rule set saying I can't take a left there, it's open. They don't care. So they even had people trying to game the system, trying to show, hey, reporting traffic in places where there wasn't any to try to prevent cut-through traffic. And the algorithm is smart enough, and the people at Waze are smart enough to be able to figure that out and kind of bypass that. So the only solution that the city has is to put a rule in place saying you can't cut through here on these hours. And so you'll see, like, up through Dodger Stadium, for example, they have restrictions that have been added over the last few years on when you can cut through those neighborhoods. Unfortunately, that goes to just highlights this massive disconnect between what Silicon Valley wants to accomplish in developing these technologies and what the cities want to have in their future. And so while the city of LA and many other cities work quite closely with Waze to try to figure out how to best maximize the data that comes out of the system and really understand how their networks are working, until we come to the same kind of goals, we're going to always have that tension.
And I think, you raised a really interesting point, which is how do you align those two interests, right? And while I was working with the city, that was one of my key focuses. How do you actually bring the parties together and march, lockstep towards that utopic vision that we all like to talk about, the connected, shared, electric future? The way I think about it, again, the city has a very important role in terms of articulating what that vision is and being able to send the right kind of market signals. I think the general manager often goes out, she talks about it quite a bit as well. But I can tell you, when I was on the other side originally as an entrepreneur, there are lots of entrepreneurs that want to work with the cities to create solutions that are genuinely aligned. We need to be able to cultivate that ecosystem through various different mechanisms, whether it be procurement pipelines or financing mechanisms, maybe seed capital. But with that, the city should be articulating, leveraging the platform that it has, what its needs are, and curate the folks that come on board to that platform. Again, we have a certain amount of regulatory power. LA is the largest market when it comes to the automobile, so we have that sway as well. And we also have significant regulatory, again, on a national level as well. We have some influence there as well. So I think the city, again, articulate the vision, be able to provide a commercialization pathway, a platform where these folks can come and deploy, and then potentially provide additional, support around financing and so on and so forth. I actually articulated earlier these notions of, in Silicon Valley, we talk about software as a service. I used to work with a lot of these companies doing M&A and IPO and things like that. These notion of as a service, I also think about the city as, if you were to use the same kind of jargon, platform as a service, right? The notion of platform as a service up in Silicon Valley is around software that creates, or software that allows the foundation to be already solved, or they already provide the foundation, so additional software can deploy on top of it, and they don't have to worry about all the, housekeeping type of activities that they would typically engage in. Could the city play that kind of role, as in, venture entrepreneurs have trouble with regulation. They have access to figuring out what the targets are. They don't know where exactly they need to go in order to solve a problem that is genuinely salient for the cities. So as a result, you get all these entrepreneurs up in Silicon Valley addressing, creating dog grooming apps. I always talk about that, how,
Creating what?
Creating dog grooming apps instead of solving genuine public infrastructure problems.
Grooming.
I spent a number of years up there as a banker, advising companies, and over and over I would see these pitches. And even today, I represent my business school in terms of investing in ventures, and over you see these B2C, very arbitrary solutions. And I'm thinking, these guys are super smart. They're coming out from the Caltechs and MITs of the world. And yet, they're solving these really arbitrary problems. How can you incentivize better channeling of this energy and the capital as well, the venture capital world out there? A significant amount of it in the past has been focused on just solving B2C, these simple apps, app type of problems. But how can you channel that towards genuine societal problem is something that I think about a lot, and I think the city has a very important role in, again, articulating the market, providing a procurement pathway for some of these folks to deploy. And once you can allow that to happen, all of a sudden you can you can create a win-win situation for the city as well, because you can parlay some of the financing, capital risk, execution risk, technology risk to the other folks that can actually do the bidding for you.
Okay, so we've got to throw it to the audience for some questions momentarily, but you have circled right back to the question that came up right at the beginning, which is this one of financing. Ashley, you were laying out this future where one doesn't have to own one's car, and then there's going to be less parking spaces needed, and all of this, and which of course is a very ideal sounding future that we'd all relish, And yet, as I said, I heard from this city planner, it's from the parking structures, it's from the gas companies, it's from the parking spaces that we make the money, that then pays for the schools and then pays for the painting of the streets, for the road markings, So it seems like there's a bit of a chicken and egg situation here.
Yeah.
And how is that? What do you say to the cities that are starting to get a little nervous?
Freaked out? Yeah. No, I think, and I think it's good to be aware of the fact that these things are happening and changing, and they need to think differently. And Michael referenced this idea of creating a platform. Transport for London did something really interesting where they partnered with Cubic, which provides a lot of transit systems around the world with their payment systems. They piloted contactless payment, and as a result of their willingness to innovate, try something new, test it out in their market, they now get a portion of the licensing fee that when Cubic then sells it to other agencies. And as a result, the Mayor of London was able to freeze transit fare for 4 years. So a really interesting, out-of-the-box, not a traditional way of thinking about revenue, but with all of the assets that cities have within their domain, there is really powerful opportunities to think about what can they do to rethink what the economic model is around owning all of those assets.
Great. David.
Yeah, I'll say a few things that speak to potential funding opportunities for the cities of the future. And I know that we'll go to Q&A pretty quick, but so you've got curbside management. You're going to have potentially you're going to have parking demand decrease rather significantly. So there goes one source of revenue. But then because people are still needing to move around and arrive and be picked up where they are going. So instead of parking a car, you get dropped off at the curb. Well, that speaks to what we were talking about earlier with needing to reformulate that right-of-way to accommodate large numbers of vehicles that are queuing up. So you've got curbside management. That's a potential revenue source. And then when you think about how we use our roadways with declining tax revenues and a shift toward electric vehicles, even though there's still a small fraction, 3 to 4% in the US of new vehicles sold, you can talk about distance-based insurances and fees. So we call that vehicle miles traveled, VMT. You can transition to that form of fee collection. You can transition to a geographically based pricing mechanism. There are several examples around the world, London, Milan, and I'm blanking on that third one. But that's where you pay to enter a certain district. In an effort to
congestion pricing?
Yeah, congestion pricing. Yeah. So
Stockholm and Singapore are the
Yeah,
other
there you
two.
go.
Right.
What's that? Stockholm
And Singapore.
and Singapore. And the last one is occupancy. So encouraging, we see that in our car, a free HOV lane is the beginning of that, encouraging, incentivizing carpooling so that you can travel more freely, take more cars off the road, transitioning that to a fee-based system. Those are several different financing revenue opportunities that are out there.
And by the way, we're already doing this in LA. You go to the airport, the way Uber, Lyft comes by, and there's proportionally large fee that the city extracts from some of these TNC providers. So that's a potential model that we can look to as we think about the automated future.
But if it's automated, there isn't a driver.
Well, there wouldn't need to be a driver, right? If you think about,
So it's the company that is paying a
Yeah, the company
percentage
can
to be
potentially pay.
providing the service.
Yeah, and also you can use, price, you hit on pricing, which is very, very interesting lever. And again, you can think about it from both on the care side and the stick side. Stick side is actually forcing people to pay for usage of the roadways and things like that. There are also care side of things, as in if you share vehicles or if you're using the roadway less, then you pay less, or maybe you even get credit for future usage of the roadway. But the notion of pricing is critical going forward. And oftentimes we think about just the financial aspect, but I think there are multiple other ways to apply that mechanism.
Right, and Ryan, you should throw in on that one. Do the car companies have a role in all of this? If none of us owns our own car, who is owning these fleets of cars that are circulating the city, and is Ford getting a percentage?
Well, I think those marketplaces are yet to be worked out, and I can't speak in detail as to exactly how it will go.
Yeah.
But I can say that I have great confidence in the regulation that cities are going to make. I think that it's going to be very comfortable for automakers, for technology companies, for whoever might be operating in that space. Whether it's curbside sharing, I like to call it, or something else. I think that there are going to be ways to make that up. There are a lot of examples historically of bad governance, but right now I'm very optimistic about there's just a tremendous energy in so many of the major cities in our country, and I think that they're leading. A lot of times I think these are the economic engines of the countries around the world, places like LA and New York and DC and Seattle, and the list could go on in the United States. And that energy, that energetic leadership in both the mayoral offices and in the DOTs, I think will lead to really good outcomes for regulation and policy that will help the urban spaces that we're in.
Great. Okay. Let's throw it open to questions. We have a question right here in the front. Do we have a microphone? Talk loud.
Ryan, I think you might have talked about this issue a little bit in the opening panel about disadvantaged communities and how they can be impacted by the mobility revolution. Thanks. So disadvantaged.
Hello?
No,
sorry.
hello.
Disadvantaged communities, how they can be impacted by the mobility revolution. And it seems like there is conflicting data and conflicting opinions out there about how public transportation and shared transportation in general are impacted by the rise of mobility on demand. And so it seems like if public transportation is affected, that people in disadvantaged communities can be disproportionately impacted by that. So how do you prevent the gains that we're receiving in terms of convenience for one sector of the population being on the backs of those other people who are losing access to public transportation?
I think that's absolutely tremendous to raise that point. And I'll reiterate some of what I said this morning. I do believe that this has the potential to really help communities like that. I do think that, and you intimated that there's this possibility of disinvestment in something like transit as other sectors provide more potential. And I think that would be a mistake. I don't think that what we should be proposing is going away from modes of transport that are tremendously efficient, that get the most number of people to a central location most efficaciously. At the same time, I think that there's opportunity to hopefully extend new modes into different parts of the population. And so any sort of decisions that we make, I think you said it well, and really can't say better myself, that we should just consider that broad spectrum of the entire population who needs to move around and not just one small stratum of potential users.
Yeah.
Well,
And I might just add, Metro Los Angeles here is piloting other business models of delivering public transit. So micro-transit, this idea that a shuttle could be called on demand to move people from neighborhood to neighborhood. They're testing that out with 3 different pilots they'll be getting started very shortly. So this idea of adapting and using the technology by transforming the traditional transit models, it's not going to ever remove the ability of a train, for example, a subway, to move a very large volume of people very efficiently a long distance. But the fact is that some of the lower density neighborhoods and some of those that are buses that are stuck in traffic will benefit from the availability of new technologies like priority signals at traffic intersections, where suddenly when you're on a bus, you get a green light guaranteed. That will help improve that experience and hopefully attract people back into public transit.
A fellow at the panel upstairs referred to the connectivity extending even to bicycles. He said we're all going to be connected.
It's already happening.
Is that happening? I guess I guess I won't take up time of questions, but I'm intrigued to know how the bicycle's going to be connected. Do we have a question over here?
Hi, my question is, with the way the infrastructure of our world and city are changing due to the advances in technology, where do you see the future of more disability accessible spaces going?
Yes.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I can take that. So when we talk about access, that's a really good question, and it feeds into the future that's possible when you think about these technologies. Especially, I'm thinking about automated technologies, automated vehicles being pretty widely used within our system, because now we can talk about a population of people that we can make access to jobs, entertainment, healthcare, education. We can provide them new opportunities. Same thing with elderly communities. And so there's a whole group of people out there that have a very hard time navigating our cities. And these technologies, it's one potential benefit that they can bring. What it also brings now is a bunch of new users to our transit system, hopefully. And so that speaks to some of what we were just talking about with needing to make sure that we're looking at it from a holistic ecosystem perspective, where you still have this backbone of public transit that can move a lot of people at once, and sort of you can think about it like a feeder network that brings people to this backbone of a transportation system. And so I'm hopeful that with this shift and adopting these new emerging technologies, that planners like myself, architects, engineers, landscape architects that are designing the space where we all interact with it, will start to make sure to accommodate this new group of people that are having this access to our system.
We've got time, I think, for one
All right,
more.
I have a question.
There
Great stuff. I mean, I guess what kind of boils down to, there's so many, it's so subjective, how is it going to work? But from a city point of view, you talk about reduced revenue and so on from taxes and gasoline, but then you look at the amount of cars, and we've heard today that there might be more cars than there have been because more people will be able to use cars and will be able to go to places. Then we talk about there won't be garages, personal garages, the cars will just circulate. Do you envision having public or parking for these fleets and making money on charging the fleets? And also, would the city ever consider owning these fleets of cars that are just very regional?
That's an interesting question.
Michael?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are all open questions. I'll speak just because I was with the city most recently, but yeah, I think all these ideas we're open to all these ideas. I guess I can't say we are because I left the city recently, but but as far as I know, yeah, they're open to different business models, different ways of generating revenue. They're open to new technologies that can enable better capture of I guess the value generation or the revenue generation or revenue share or whatnot. So yeah, open.
And we've hit the zeros. We should close the panel. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Ashley Hand, David DeRosa, Michael Lim, and Ryan Westrom. It's great to talk.